Okay, thank you very much indeed for your time. I do have some three questions. My first question is, why do you think Abiy preferred to launch such attacks in the southern front while diplomatic efforts to resolve the problem peacefully were underway? Secondly, in the meantime, it was reportedly told that Abiy has ordered its Eastern Command to cross borders and join Eritrean forces. So what does that imply? My last question is, as to different analysis, the way the international community handled the case of Tigray has failed. As to them, the international community is more focusing on treating Abiy Ahmed's regime or the Prime Minister himself in a special manner. What is your stand in this regard? Thank you very much indeed.
I also have several questions. My first question is regarding Saturday's statement by the Tigray Military Command, which stated that the Tigrayan army neutralized the large-scale offensive launched by Ethiopian forces. What was the aim of this wide-ranging offensive? And my second question is, there are still accusations that coming from the Ethiopian government that TPLF is only responsible for the eruption of hostilities. Who do you think is standing in the way of this? And the international community is also condemning the eruption of hostilities, and calling for the cessation of hostilities immediately. And what is the possibility and the likelihood that these hostilities will be stopped soon? And my last question is regarding the WF's chief, David Basley's accusation to your government. He said that your government has stolen fuel tankers belonging to the World Food Programme. And the Tigray External Affairs Office has issued a statement that allegations were baseless, and the WFP needs to correct its error. And have you settled your difference with WFP? Thank you so much.
Thank you. On Friday, the Ethiopian government conducted an airstrike on kindergarten and children's playground in Mekelle, and soon after released a statement claiming that it will take all necessary measures and attack military bases, and asked civilians to refrain from such areas. Yet the attack was conducted on a residential area. What is your say on this matter, and if there are any updates on the number of casualties? My second question is that on Wednesday, the Ethiopian government authorities have issued incoherent statements claiming that they have downed an aircraft crossing Ethiopian borders to deliver weaponry to Tigray, which Tigray External Affairs Office said that it was a false claim issued to lay fertile ground to conduct aerial bombardments on Tigray, and asked the international community to prevail on Ethiopian government to refrain from attacking civilians. Can we say that the international community has failed the people of Tigray? And my last question is, as he mentioned, that you have written on Twitter that the elements of the Ethiopian forces have joined the Eritrean forces to hold joint attacks on Tigray. Is there any alarming danger coming from it?
Well, with regard to why Abiy decided to launch the offensive on the 24th of August, I can't really say why, because ultimately this is going to be this is better addressed by the very people who launches the offensive in the first place. But there are probable causes why Abiy decided to launch an offensive on the 24th, and more importantly, why in the south. For one thing, despite their continued shifting of the goalposts when it comes to their commitment for negotiations, Abiy and company were able to hoodwink the international community into believing that they probably were serious about peace, although everything they have done belies such an assumption on the part of the international community. But they felt that they have secured enough gullible international community support to get away with any calculated risk of launching an offensive. That's one thing. Because they have never been interested in peace anyway. Abiy company have essentially been preaching for peace, not because they are interested in peace, but more importantly, because they want to appear to be interested in peace. To the extent that there was readiness on the part of Abiy's government to talk about peace, it was mostly for the purpose of diplomatic and media consumption. Yes, it's one thing to be interested in peace, to be genuinely interested in peace, but it's entirely different to be interested in the whole process of negotiations, which would help you buy time, which would help you put your enemies on a very defensive position. Tigray is under siege. The government would have to answer for all the calamities they visited upon its own people. Its forces will be raising all kinds of difficult questions. Why they are not allowed to liberate their people in their entirety, while they can. People will be asking all kinds of questions, and that will put pressure on the leadership. And in the meantime, in the absence of action or in the absence of any meaningful peace process, the Tigrayan defense forces will start disintegrating. That's the thinking behind, because we have been gathering intelligence reports that they were counting on the possibility of Tigrayan forces disintegrating in the event of anything meaningful not happening as a result of the peace process. So they thought this was an opportune moment for them to launch an attack. And second, as you know, on the 15th of August, a well-orchestrated shelling targeted our positions in Western Tigray. It turns out we had to wait 3 more days to prove whether this was a freak incident or a premeditated decision on the part of the military top brass in Addis Ababa. And it turned out it was a premeditated action on the part of the military and civilian top leadership in Addis Ababa. So technically, we knew the cessation of hostilities agreement was breached, but because of our commitment for the continuation of the cessation of hostilities agreement, we decided to hold fire. In fact, we didn't respond in kind. As it turned out, the chief of staff of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces was wondering why we would not be content with responding fire by fire rather than engaging in an all-out engagement. I don't know what that means militarily. I don't know what that means even whether it makes any sense semantically. So they were sharing our positions. The fact that we didn't share our positions was about avoiding breakup of hostilities. But Birhanu Jula is wondering why we didn't settle for just responding in kind rather than escalating. We didn't escalate in the first place. But 9 days later, Abiy and Birhanu Jula know that most of our forces were concentrated around Western Tigray for obvious reasons. So while we have been very consistent about our demand for peace, we also knew that in the event of a breakdown of such arrangements, would be forced to fight in Western Tigray and liberate Western Tigray. We have never been interested in Amhara territory. We have never been interested in Afar territory. That's why 5-6 months ago, we decided to withdraw from those areas. So that would give peace an opportunity. So it would be foolhardy for us to expect an offensive from the south, and most of our forces were concentrated in the west, and they know that. So they were giving us signal that they were trying to launch an offensive in the west. They still are ready to launch an offensive in the west, we know that, probably in cahoots with the regime in Asmara. And so when they launched the offensive, it was, I wouldn't say it did come as a surprise in the sense that we knew they would be looking for an opportune moment to attack, but it came as a surprise because that's not the kind of direction their offensive, we expected their offensive to take. So we defended our positions for about 2 days, two and a half days, and we were able to checkmate them. So they probably thought our defense lines were thinner in the south, that would put them in a better position to march all the way on Maqala easily, probably, but ultimately the right answer could only be gleaned from them, and they are the ones who know why they did what they did. But they launched an offensive. We defended our position for 2 consecutive days, and the afternoon of the third day, we were able to effectively resist their offensive, and we set out to launch a counter-offensive. The rest, as they say, history. And most of northern Wollo now, as we speak, is a significant portion of northern Wollo is under our hands, under our forces. We're not particularly interested in controlling this area or that area, but as long as the forces that were unleashed against us are ready to threaten the safety and security of our people, we'll continue to take appropriate measures to neutralize that threat. Whether neutralizing that threat would take us to some part of Amhara or Afar is an entirely different matter. But it looks like we cannot simply count on the international community to rein in Abiy and his war dogs for our safety and security, obviously. We have to still depend on our forces, not only to neutralize the threat, but to continue to keep guard against similar threats, whether they come from the north, from the south, from the east, whatever. So what transpired in that engagement was they first deployed the Amhara Special Force divisions very close to our defense lines, and they knew that would provoke us into responding. We didn't. By the way, I have to call attention of our friends, our partners alike, that there was an incident about 2 months ago, which involved a very large contingent of Amhara Special Forces that tried to attack our positions in southwestern part of Raya. We took care of that unit, but the National Defense Forces contingents followed probably in their support, and we engaged them, and thanks to the engagement between the commander of our forces and the chief of staff, we were able to avert a full-scale hostility. In fact, one of the things we agreed to do was to withdraw from that particular area, so would not give the Amhara Special Force an excuse to provoke us again. And this was a very strategic position. And we took it back yesterday, the day before yesterday, but we had handed over that very strategic position to the National Defense Forces because it was that decision we believed was going to be the best interest of peace itself. That the Abiy and company were really genuine about not genuine about peace, at least they were ready for negotiations, okay? So we knew what we are capable of doing, but at least the international community needed to be reassured that we're not just a bunch of trigger-happy people who would shoot at any incident that involves shooting. Because we knew the people of Tigray deserve peace, and we knew every day that we spend in peace will be in the best interest of the people of Tigray. We need food aid, not because the people of Tigray were not able to feed themselves, but simply because our enemies imposed a situation that has made it almost impossible for the people of Tigray to survive without food aid. Okay, so at least that would give us enough reason to tolerate any simple provocations from here and there. But they launched an offensive. And it was something of a surprise in the sense that the kind of exchange of ideas we had with their top brass was that they should remove the Amhara special forces because they are likely to engage in provocative activities. But it turned out it was the 6th and 8th commands, very huge commands, with some of the most experienced infantry and mechanized units Abiy Ahmed has launched the offensive on the 24th of early morning, 24th of August. I will come back to the question of why the international community, what it has done and whether it has failed us. But I will address the second question, which is what the objective of our Tigray Defense Forces is in this particular. This is not a campaign. By the way, if you notice, we don't even have a name for the campaign because it's not a campaign we initiated. It was a campaign imposed on us. So we have been defending our positions, and now we are in counter-offensive. And like I said, we have taken over most of the territory because the 6th and 8th and the Southern Command units are in absolute disarray. We have taken thousands of people as prisoners of war. We have captured material and all those things. But we're not particularly interested in this or that territory. As long as there is a threat, whether that threat comes from Bahar Dar or from Samara is secondary as far as we're concerned. We have to neutralize it, and it was imposed on us. And what's our objective? It's about ensuring the safety and security of the people of Tigray and making sure that every territory of Tigray is back in the hands of Tigray. Whether that happens peacefully or through military means is an entirely different question. But we prefer it to be done peacefully, but it's very unfortunate that despite its sometimes lukewarm, sometimes seemingly genuine efforts to achieve peaceful resolution to the conflicts, the international community has miserably failed to achieve this objective simply because it's mostly interested in coddling Abiy, and there is every indication that the readiness to speak truth to power is conspicuously missing in the international community's repertoire of negotiations efforts. But we still hope and expect the international community to get its acts together and put pressure to bear on Abiy and his government so that they would come back to their senses and to realize that the only viable choice in town is talking, not shooting. Shooting didn't work the first time around, and it's not going to work this time around either. It's obvious that even they are highly acclaimed, highly prepped offensive in the southern front was essentially broken in a matter of 2 days, and as we speak, our forces are taking care of the retreating units. Whether that will take us where that's a different story. But we will continue to take care of those forces. Ultimately, they are not there to protect the people of Amhara. They were not there to protect the people of Afar. They were there to make sure that the people of Tigray do not have access to food. And these are a bunch of trigger-happy people who shoot at women, who shoot at defenseless children, except that they are not in any way interested in maintaining even the territorial integrity of the country. Well, Al-Shabaab is attacking the country in different directions. Abiy hasn't deployed any contingent from the National Defense Forces. And the Southern Command, there is no Northern Command because Tigray is north. The Western Command, the Northwestern Command, are named in relation to their position vis-a-vis Tigray itself. So the entire Ethiopian National Defense Forces are not about defending the country from Ethiopia's, as they say, historical enemies, no matter who those historical enemies are. It's about containing Tigray. It's about starving the people of Tigray. It's about siege starving the entire population. It's very unfortunate, but it's true. So as far as we're concerned, we have defended our positions, and we are now launching a counteroffensive. Abiy keeps making miscalculations after miscalculations, keeps sending reinforcements, and we'll continue to neutralize. And that will take us probably deeper and deeper into Amhara region. I don't know, but that has never been our intention. That will never be our intention. But it's very unfortunate that Abiy prefers the Amhara region to be the theater of war. In fact, that raises a question why, rather than sending the Eastern Command, which should have been in the eastern part of Tigray, to cross the border to Eritrea. So they could coordinate their efforts with the Eritrean regime and probably launch the second or third round of their genocidal campaign against Tigray. How that will turn out in practice remains to be seen, but the intention obviously is clear. Abiy doesn't have the slightest of intentions to defend the people of Amhara or Amhara territory. So whether we like it or not, as much as he wants the Amhara people to contribute their sons and daughters in defense of a cause that does not in any way reflect their choices, it does not in any way promote their interests, but something that promotes the interest of Abiy and a few oligarchs who want to profiteer from the plight of the people of Amhara, and of course, obviously, the plight and the fate of the people of Tigray and the rest of the Ethiopian population as well. Who's standing in the way of peace? Obviously, Abiy is standing in the way of peace. You know, Abiy promised the international community that he would restore services. He would ensure unfettered humanitarian access, but all along he's been obstructing unfettered humanitarian access, using all kinds of excuses, using all kinds of pretexts. And the services issue, which should not have been conditional, they made it conditional. Even they had promised to the envoys who came to Mekelle that all they needed was our guarantee that would not attack. The very technicians would come here and open banks, fix telecommunications, fix electricity and all that. As preposterous as it might sound, this was pretty much the demand that was made of us. And we did oblige, but all of a sudden, Abiy's government, true to form, went back to its old habit, giving the envoys a dress down, blaming them for posing for selfies with terrorist leaders, quote unquote, and coddling TPLF leaders. You know, that's the kind of. But obviously, they didn't want to restore services. And who's standing in the way of peace? Obviously, people who, despite making promises after promises to restore services, are standing in the way, publicly so, of restoration of services, are the ones who are standing in the way of peace. It doesn't require a genius to figure this out. And the offensive was launched by Abiy Ahmed because he thought that he had secured enough goodwill from the international community with regard to his readiness for peace. And then whatever he does, it would be blamed on people who have found ourselves in a very a very awkward situation. So despite provocations in the West, despite provocations here and there, we had made a very conscious decision to hold our fire in the interest of peace. So obviously, I don't have to explain this at length. The facts themselves speak for themselves. The cessation of hostilities agreement have been, the UN and other organizations have been calling, the US government has been calling for immediate cessation of hostilities. It's good that they are calling for immediate cessation of hostilities, but it also behooves them to lay the blame squarely on the culprit, who has broken the cessation of hostilities agreement or understanding or whatever they like to call it. Obviously, the facts speak for themselves. The international community has all the facts, and it is not the government of Tigray that is going to blame for launching an offensive in what appeared to be one of the thinnest defense lines that we had. But luckily for us, we were able to defend our position and then engage the enemy in a counter-offensive that has proven its mettle so far. And the enemy has lost tens of thousands of personnel, either killed or wounded. We have thousands and thousands of prisoners of war again. And that speaks volumes of the intentions of. And now the Eastern Command, uncharacteristically, an Eastern Command joining the Eritrean forces to attack Tigray again. That, for one thing, obviously shows that Abiy is not interested in defending Amhara or Afar. So it's left to our decision then. Then he wants to make sure that we don't have access to Sudan, we don't have access to the outside world, although he keeps blaming Ethiopia's historical enemies for supporting us. I don't know who those historical enemies are. The usual suspects, of course, are Egypt and Sudan, I guess. I would say Abiy has done more than anyone else to prostrate himself before these authorities to do their bidding. I honestly wouldn't mind getting support from anyone as long as it helps secure my people. What's unfortunate is we're not in a position to get the support because we are under a 24/7, 360-degree blockade, courtesy of Abiy Ahmed and his partners in crime, the Eritrea. So, yes, the cessation of hostilities agreement was breached by Abiy, who launched an offensive. The offensive was off to a bad start, and it hasn't just unraveled. Even the reinforcements that have been sent to reverse the gains that our forces have made have been effectively dealt with, and the engagement still continues, by the way. So whether that was the original intention or not, I wouldn't tell, but most of northern Wollo is now in the hands of our forces. If the engagement, the desperate efforts to stop, to send reinforcements or to try to undo our gains will continue to take appropriate measures, and that exactly will determine where we'll end up. But the most important concern for us is to ensure that there is little or no threat that is going to be posed against the safety and security of the people of Tigray. Whether it comes from east or north or west or south is of secondary importance to us. What matters is whether we can ensure the safety and security of our people, and we'll do it peacefully if possible, through the military means like what we are doing now, if necessary. This is pretty much where our positions are. By the way, there is another sick joke that Ethiopia's historic enemies are sending plane loads of weapons to TPLF Tigray, and that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces have downed a plane. It turns out, depending on who says what, there probably are 3 planes downed by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. And the Field Marshal Birhanu Jula had the audacity to tell us the plane that was downed was an Antonov 26 or something kind of plane. The Air Force chief came out and say he would furnish video evidence, but they wouldn't give a hoot whether people would ask them that question again. They don't have any video evidence because it didn't happen. They don't have any video evidence because that plane, that mysterious plane, didn't show up. Why are they doing? So one of them said, the National Security Advisor said it was down in Maghreb while unloading its payload. And it begs begs the question how a plane that was unloading the weapons it was carrying would be downed by an Air Force attack. It just is mind-boggling. And one of the officials apparently claimed that it was downed while trying to cross the Sudanese border to and another second-rate official, I should say, second-tier official, also said it was down in Shararo. I would advise my erstwhile friends and comrades to at least try and find a sort of a common story that would involve some element of deniability. It's very unfortunate they don't have the appetite to even ensure the constituency of the constant lying that has become their modus operandi. The thing is, why are they insisting on, this is the same day they launched an offensive. They're complaining that these are the very people who internationalize the conflict by inviting the Eritrean regime, by inviting the Somalis to be part of the campaign against Tigray, using Emirati drones, all kinds of assortment of regional militias to attack Tigray. And now they have to find some kind of boogeyman that they knew they were losing grounds because their offensive was off to a bad start. And then all of a sudden they would want to hoodwink the Ethiopian people that if it wasn't for the support of Ethiopia's historic enemies, then they would not have lost ground. Well, I hope this time around the people of Ethiopia would say no to such cheap tricks by a regime that has perfected lying into an art form. This time around it's unraveling. Even the art form is getting shakier. But there was no plane. That mysterious plane wasn't downed by the Ethiopian Air Force. And the attempt was simply to internationalize the conflict and to blame the loss on the support to TPLF or Tigray government of so-called Ethiopia's historic enemies, namely probably Egypt and Sudan. I hope the Egyptian and Sudanese authorities will speak for themselves as far as such a claim is made, is concerned. The airstrike, and another reason we believe, as you rightly pointed out, the reason why they had to come up with the apocryphal plane story was to justify a blanket carpet sort of bombing if they can. I think they have the intention. Whether they have the planes to conduct a carpet bombing will remain to be seen, but that's their intention anyway. And so they wanted to justify, sort of pre-justify, as it were, their decision to carpet bomb Tigray civilian installations. And as it was made abundantly clear, what they did was attack a kindergarten, kill children, and claim the same day that was a smoking gun. They said they'd be hitting targets, military targets, and they called on the people of Tigray to evacuate areas, and they didn't mention those areas. So they were telling the people of Tigray that they were a fair game for any plane attack. They were a fair target for any plane attack. So the story, the apocryphal story of the plane carrying weapons being downed by the Ethiopian Air Force was meant to justify, as it turned out, of course, that proved to be the case, to justify any carpet bombing against civilians in Tigray. There is no military installation in that particular kindergarten, not even within kilometers. And the smoking gun was, the government issued a statement that they would continue to attack positions and that they would call on Tigrayans to evacuate those areas. In fact, the chief of staff, Marshal Brahanu Jula, had the audacity to come out in public and call on the people of Tigray to leave Tigray en masse and probably join the Prosperity Party in Wollo, in Afar, in other parts of the country, so they could avoid being being killed along with TPLF and the Tigray forces. It's mind-boggling. It's probably the most tragicomic situation we find ourselves in. A chief of staff calling on the people of Tigray to evacuate Tigray proper, so they would not be targets. And they are telling us in plain terms that they will be ready to attack every civilian installation in Tigray, no matter what the circumstances. It's very unfortunate. And now, what has the international community done? You know, there have been some perfunctory statements about two sides calling on the two sides to exercise restraint, to call on the two sides to cease hostilities immediately. And with regard to the attack against defenseless children in a kindergarten, there was little in the way of condemnation of the regime which conducted it. Maybe they are doing it in the interest of peace. That's what they keep saying, because they don't want to push Abiy and his government into the corner. Some of them would tell us that they want to save Abiy, and they would do it at the expense of Tigrayan children. Why is the international community not doing enough? Well, obviously, it has failed Tigray. We still are grateful to what the international community has done to highlight the plight of the people of Tigray, especially the international humanitarian community has been in the forefront of not only exposing the crimes that have been committed against the people of Tigray, but also trying to secure support, humanitarian and or otherwise, for the people of Tigray. We're grateful to that. But the fact that in the diplomatic area, the international community is ready to be taken for a ride when Abiy makes gestures after 6 months of obstructing peace. He makes seemingly good gestures for peace, and then he would be welcomed as if it was a great breakthrough. But people like us who have been calling for peace for 6 months would still be considered recalcitrant if we are defending our positions. That's very unfortunate. And if that's not failing Tigray, I don't think anything will be. The international community, we're not going to squarely blame the international community for everything. You know, obviously, Abiy wants us to take the international committee for a ride, but with circumstances that are unfolding. For example, the movement of Ethiopian troops to Eritrea. It's anybody's guess whether another offensive is going to be launched by a joint Ethiopian and Eritrean force in the northern part of the country. It has nothing to do with securing the interest of Ethiopia. It has nothing to do with protecting the interest of Amhara or Afar. It has everything to do with evening an old score or finishing off TPLF and Tigray, the people of Tigray. And unless the international community takes it upon itself to expose such shenanigans, such obvious anti-peace and belligerent behavior on the part of regimes which have shown their readiness to use every opportunity to unleash their dogs of war, and then obviously the international community will have decided, must have decided to not just abandon the people of Tigray, but also to send the entire Horn of Africa region aflame. Because what Isaias is doing is to destabilize the entire region, not just to even hold scores with TPLF or with the Tigray leadership or with the people of Tigray. Everything he does is about underwriting terror, underwriting confusion, underwriting chaos in the Horn of Africa region. And to allow Abiy and Isaias to get away with their bloody adventure is to unwittingly promote the disintegration of the Horn of Africa itself. And that I would say the responsibility should be laid under the international community's feet. It behooves the international community to take appropriate measures, to call out actors on what they have miserably failed, and to still coddle Abiy and expect him to sue for peace would not be only naive, but also that would amount to the height of irresponsibility. As far as we're concerned, peace is not just in our strategic interest. We want to feed our people. We need to feed our people. We need to make sure that basic necessities, basic services are restored in Tigray. And we would be, and we are the last people, the last government, the last entity to provoke another round of hostilities. Even as we defend our positions and continue to do mop-up operations against those who came to attack us and the reinforcements that are being sent every other hour by Abiy Ahmed, we are still ready to go back to the drawing board and try and resolve this conflict peacefully. And let the international community be clear that it's not Tigray which is standing in the way of peace, but Abiy Ahmed and his partners in crime, especially the Eritrean regime, who are now trying to further escalate the crisis by opening another front and by trying and break the Tigray people's resistance. And as far as our strong spirit of resistance is concerned, our people once again, and our forces once again have proven their mettle. They are not interested in aggression against the people of Amhara. They are not interested in aggression in the people of Afar. They are not interested in the aggression against the people of Eritrea. We are only interested in making sure that our people be given the chance to exercise their full measure of self-determination right, and will be more than willing to put our lives on the line to make sure that this indeed is the case. And we are fighting a defensive war. We will remain open for any negotiations as long as the people who have unleashed their dogs of war in the hope that they could subdue the people of Tigray into submission, realize that their mission to fight their way out of crisis and to fight their way into Mekelle is not going to work. That much they should understand, that much the international community should understand. As far as our forces and the people of Tigray are concerned, it didn't happen yesterday, it's not happening today, it will not happen tomorrow. Well, with regard to the outrageous claim by the WFP executive director that our forces have stolen, or the Tigray government has stolen fuel tankers, All I can say is that we have had a very productive and good working relationship with WFP for a long time now. And we are grateful to what WFP and other UN organizations and other humanitarian organizations have achieved with regard to feeding our people, reaching out to the needy, even when the circumstances were particularly dire. The timing and the intensity of, or the passion with which Executive Director David Beasley attacked us raises so many questions. Executive Director Beasley had never uttered a word, not even a single word, when 4 months ago, after the cessation of hostilities agreement, Afar militia forces, probably at the behest of Abiy Ahmed, attacked WFP trucks destined for Tigray and ransacked WFP cargo in a manner that would shock the conscience of any sane people, let alone the executive director of WFP itself. He didn't say a word. He didn't say anything. And he, unfortunately, has hardly shown the level of passion that he displayed in attacking the theft by our government of fuel that duly belongs to us throughout the 20-something months blockade. I'm not saying the WFP has not been a very reliable partner as far as provision of aid is concerned. And I'm not blaming David Beasley for anything other than his very unfortunate choice of words and totally uncalled for characterization of us. Having said that, if stealing was something we had proclivities for, we would have stolen WFP resources in Kombolcha when we assigned a division to protect WFP warehouses. There was, despite a clear and realistic possibility of people, starving people in that part of Amhara, to ransack WFP warehouses. Even fighters whose parents were not able to feed themselves in Tigray because Abiy Ahmed imposed a siege, took upon themselves to protect warehouses that belonged to WFP and CRS. So if we had the proclivities to steal stuff, we would have stolen hundreds of thousands of food, quintals of food, tons of food in Kombolcha and other parts of the country. So we worked with WFP to facilitate. And one of the arrangements we have, we work very closely with WFP, we in OCHA, higher officials included, and we have a very good working relationship with them. And we're not complaining about WFP in the first place. One of the things we had agreed was because there was a lack of fuel, we loaned fuel, about 600-something thousand liters of fuel to WFP so it can distribute food not only to Tigray but also to Amhara and Afar. That much. This is clearly put in an agreement in correspondences that have been exchanged between the part of the government of Tigray that is in charge of fuel and WFP officials here. So we simply demanded what's rightfully ours, because our hospitals are running out of diesel generators. We cannot operate on dying children simply because we don't have access to fuel. And there is an absolute blackout in Tigray. And why would it be quite strange for Governor Beasley, for the government of Tigray to demand the fuel that it has loaned to the WFP because it wants and it needs to run its hospitals, because Tigray is under absolute blockade and Tigray is under absolute blackout. he should have asked his own people in Maqala. He should have asked his own people even in Rome to understand what was going on and what really went on. But unfortunately, I'm not going to psychoanalyze his motive or anything. But the fact that such an outrageous accusation was leveled against us when Abiy was attacking our positions, was launching an offensive and defending our positions, simply speaks volumes about where these people's loyalties are. So it took the attention away, not from the invasion that was being visited upon us, not away from the offensive that was launched against our forces. It put the attention squarely on something that should not have merited any media attention in the first place, because it could have been resolved with close discussion with WFP officials here and Tigray Trade Industry Bureau officials here. But they chose to blame the victim for spurious reasons. So obviously, it would say something about their loyalties there. Having said that, as outrageous as a claim that we stole fuel is, there is another more outrageous claim they made. They said they have never borrowed fuel from us, and again, in similar vein, they would admit that they had already made payments for the 550,000 or 600,000 liters of fuel they have loaned from us. So they deny to have loaned fuel from us, but at the same time they claim to have made a payment on account of the fuel they loaned from us. What's particularly more strange is not the self-contradiction, the apparent self-contradiction in the two claims, that they haven't loaned from fuel from us and that they have made payment on account of fuel they took from us. What's more outrageous is the fact that they say they have made a payment to a certain Yemane, probably owner of a fuel depot or something, on account of some fuel that they got from us, from the government of Tigray. Why would WFP Addis Ababa decide to make a payment to someone on account of something, some fuel that was loaned to them by the government of Tigray? So obviously there is something fishy about the claims they are making, and I would call on Governor Beasley to really focus on what is going on in the WFP, especially in Addis Ababa. Whether, I mean, it's one thing to be self-contradictory, to claim that you haven't borrowed fuel and to say that you have made a payment on account of a fuel you've borrowed, although you have claimed not to have borrowed it. That's one thing. But to say that the payment was made to someone who has never had anything to do with this transaction would raise a number of questions. So for the interest of ensuring the integrity of WFP itself, it would behoove Governor Beasley to ask the right questions, whether those payments were made legally or illegal. Obviously, they were not made legally, because you cannot make payments to someone who hasn't supplied anything. So it was us who supplied the fuel. We loaned the fuel. And if payment was ever going to be made, it should have been made to us, but we didn't ask for payments because our agreement was for them to return in kind. And yes, but at least the executive director of WFP managed to take the attention away from Abiy's offensive against Tigray. And the international community was seized with this false apocryphal claim of fuel theft, no matter how outrageous that claim was. But the point is, WFP officials here know what happened, and even WFP officials Rome really understand it, UN OCHA really knows it, and whatever differences we are ready to resolve those differences in close coordination with WFP here, and we remain grateful to what WFP has achieved over the years, especially in protecting the people of Tigray. Otherwise, I don't think Governor Beasley was particularly sympathetic to the cause of WFP itself, and he, I would say, should have long recused himself from that particular issue. And it doesn't look good when the executive director of a very celebrated humanitarian organization to try and take a side on a very sensitive political issue that has far-reaching ramifications for the peace and stability of in the entire Africa, the entire Horn of Africa region. And it is very unbecoming of a humanitarian to try and take sides on such a conflict. It's very unfortunate, but that's pretty much what happened. Thank you.